I think it's time now, right?
Hello, LinkedIn. Great to have you all joining us today. We have another exciting edition of LinkedIn Live for the podcast Leaders in Supply Chain. I'm delighted to have with us today Andreu Marco, joining us from Europe, from beautiful Barcelona, a city that I miss, I love, and I hope soon enough I'll be able to join Andreu again there. Brief introduction for those of you who may not know Andreu. He is a long-standing executive within supply chain. He has over 25 years experience across end-to-end supply chain, working for retail, luxury, and FMCG brands, most notably Burberry and Inditex. He has been focused on downstream supply chain, omnichannel, international transport, online, offline fulfillment, distribution, planning and allocation, and many, many other aspects of supply chain. Also, maybe very importantly, and also for the topic of today, we will go deeper on the fact that he was the global SVP supply chain for Burberry, and he oversaw in that role the channel transformation that saw Burberry become the leader in luxury omnichannel. So quite an interesting story, something that a lot of people are still struggling with even today, and I think very valuable lessons to share. So without further ado, let me first say welcome, Andreu. Thanks for making the time and great to have you.
Thank you, Radu. It's a pleasure to be here. So I hope you find it interesting.
For sure. And maybe let's start, first and foremost, let's start a little bit about you, right, as a person, and also how you kind of ended up in supply chain. I mean, you've been around for 25 years, but, how did you end up in the first place? Maybe just paint a 2-3 minute short, gist of your career type of a story.
Yeah, thanks, Radu. So yes, I've been in supply chain for more than 25 years, as you mentioned. It's always been my passion about. I love organization, I love planning, and I'm very passionate about creating customer service experiences to people, and it comes from my family who was in this world before I was. So I even went to college while I was working for a Spanish freight forwarder called Ezeiza, and then I joined companies like Kappa in Italy. I went to Inditex, which I will say Inditex has been the best school I ever had. It's a place where I have learned the most, and I'm still very close with my Inditex friends, particularly Massimo Dutti brand. And then Burberry, which has been the experience of my life. I spent 16 years in this organization, which I love to pieces, and particularly because I had the opportunity to work with people like Andy Janowski, Roberto Canevari, and Angela Ahrendts, who is this very charismatic leader who gave us the opportunity to transform Burberry and to make it the most sophisticated omnichannel and digital player in the luxury industry. So it's been really, I would say, I've been very lucky in terms of the people that I have worked with, but also the companies that I had the pleasure and opportunity to work for. It has been an amazing journey, and I still enjoy it, I have to say.
Yeah, that for sure. And I know you're also teaching, and usually people that teach supply chain are the ones that are most passionate, and we'll come to that as well. Exactly. I want to kind of, if we had to zoom in on fashion, right, which has been, I guess, main area of focus and the one that you've been closest to. Let's start a little bit with the past and where we are today, and then we'll talk about the omnichannel journey of Burberry as well, right? But what have been some of the major shifts, right? So historically, it has come a long way, right? 10, 20 years that you've been around, right? From where it was 20 years to where it is now. And then we'll transition slowly also into that omnichannel transformation you did at Burberry.
Thanks, Radu. I think I was very lucky because, having the opportunity of working for Inditex, it's amazing because in reality, I had the opportunity to learn that model, that fast retail model. That their biggest focus is speed and how they treat customers, how they arrive on time, but also how they bring the product that they need. I think their allocation model is very interesting because keep in mind that what they do in Inditex is they manufacture all around the world. They bring everything to Spain, normally to Coruña or to Madrid, which I would say are not the best logistics locations in the world. but they still believe that creating one single pool of inventory is the most appropriate way of solving the issues of consumers. So they prefer to do the allocation on the very last moment. They prefer to invest a lot in transportation, and they keep inventories very low. So what I learned in Inditex was I don't think I have changed any much of what I have learned in Inditex. Of course, the world has been evolving, and when I went to Burberry, it was more about creating a luxury experience. So it was more focused on service. But what we were able to do in Burberry was a little of the same. We created a global one single pool of inventory. We created the first omnichannel company in the industry, in the luxury industry. We created the most sophisticated digital models for consumers. And what we say was very simple. We said the inventory has to belong to the consumer, not to the company, not to the store, not to the distribution center, not to the allocation system. So it was a very revolutionary way of managing inventory. And the result was that we were able to increase inventory availability, therefore a massive increase on sales, while at the same time we were able to reduce the weight of working capital and inventory. So it was this magic combination of let's use all the assets that we have in the company, meaning inventory, no matter if they are online, offline, if they are in a concession, if they are in a warehouse of a vendor, or if they are in transit. Let's put all of that at the service of the consumer, and let's do something uh, very interesting, which is why don't we let the consumer take the decision instead of us taking allocation decisions of who is going to get what or where are we going to put this product. So we transform all our systems, and I have to say supply chain and systems and IT has to be we have to be working very close together, because a lot of this is technology and data management. So what we did was to merge all of this together and to put the consumer to drive our decisions. And as I say before, and you probably have seen it, Burberry has been very successful in the omnichannel industry, in the omnichannel world, because we were the first one to create these models. And it was not only with Burberry, it was with concessions or people like Tmall, WeChat in China, or with the department stores in the US, or with the big players, marketplaces like Farfetch or Net-a-Porter. So it was a very, very interesting journey. Kind of, I would say, applying what I learned in Inditex, which is the consumer is the boss, with the technology and with the digital tools and data management that we have nowadays. And that has been very successful and gave us the opportunity to totally transform a company that was very much a wholesale player. I will argue not too much luxury. And what we did was to create a very luxury company with amazing services for the consumer.
And I'd like to zoom in even further, right? Because this is fantastic, and I do remember vividly, and I think it was even fairly recent, that in China they announced another digital, and again Burberry was the first to announce a digital mall, digital experience. I mean, it's always at the forefront. But I guess if we had to look back, and you were there as part of that transformation, right? A lot of companies get stuck, right, from the legacy, let's call it, what's old, to making that shift and transition to, most people would want to do the same, right? But they get stuck somewhere in between. So I guess, what were some of the, if you had to distill that experience, some of the key things that made it successful, right? That transformation, because always we don't like change, right? As human beings, we don't like change, right? So what, you talked about systems a little bit, but I just want to go a little bit deeper and take that gems of transformation that work most.
Yeah. I think, Radu, the interesting thing is, I agree with you. I think for a company that has been 150 years in the industry, like Burberry, it's a lot more complicated to transform and to change than for a startup company. If you are more digital, if you are Farfetch or if you are Net-a-Porter, I think things are different because you have been born digitally. I have to say, change management is something that we need to take in consideration. It's very important, particularly because our companies have been built through the years with channels, with wholesale channel, with retail channel, with distribution channel, with licensing channel, you name e-commerce channel, you name it. And they all work in isolation. They all work in a different way with different leaders. And we kind of spend a lot of money in our companies to isolate and create these silos. So it's kind of I bought this inventory for retail, or I bought this inventory for wholesale. It belongs to me. My customers place an order. Nobody can take this inventory, period. It's kind of, this is mine. And what we did in Burberry was exactly the other way around. Is how can we unbuild all this structure that has been like that for many, many years, for more than 100 years, I would say. How can we build bridges between all these channels? How can we create one pool of inventory that is available for anybody who is ready to buy? And conversion is the key word. And conversion could be in a concession, it could be in a store, it could be in Tmall, it could be in a marketplace, in anywhere. And of course, there are differences in terms of the profitability of that conversion. But at the end of the day, for a luxury brand, and I will argue for any brand, what really matters is traffic and conversion. So if we have the product, but we're unable to sell it to the consumer because it happens to be under another entity or under another channel, I think it's a missed opportunity. And the chances of that product ending up in an outlet or with a lower price are quite big. So in reality, if we are convinced that conversion is what really matters, and that the consumers are the ones who have to drive our decisions, not the other way around, because I think all supply chains until 5-10 years ago, we were kind of investing in technology to tell us more about predictability models, how to ship product to the customer, how do we do a proper allocation, how do we have the right assortment in every store or in every customer. What we're doing is totally different. What we're doing is exactly the other way around, because what we're saying is forget about all of that. Of course, we still need to have some of that, these legacy systems, but in reality, our role as supply chain leaders is to eliminate these frictions from consumers who wants to buy our products. And these frictions and these barriers have been built artificially by our companies during the past many years. So it's our obligation to take them down. And when we do it, and this is what happened in Burberry, when we were able to do this through technology like order management system and connectivity data management, we saw a massive increase in sales. And we saw a massive decrease in the inventory holding that we were having. What we also saw is that change management is important, and that we cannot pretend that everybody, for example, in the retail stores, is going to understand from day one what we're trying to do. Because in reality, what we were saying is, if you believe that the inventory belongs to the consumer who wants to buy it, it means that you become a servant leader of that consumer in any part of the company. So if you work in one store, you can be working potentially for a customer that is buying online, or for a customer that is buying in Tmall in China, or in a concession in Galeries Lafayette. And understanding this, and it's something that, yes, we need to work with HR, and we need to work with different parts of the organization, because it's change management, because the companies were not born like that.
And I guess this is the $1 million, one of the $1 million bullets, right, that make or break change or transformations, right? So I give you an example. I know of a good friend of mine. He works for a large manufacturing company, and literally he wants to transform. I'm not going to name them, obviously. The CEO is somewhat wanting to transform, but somewhat encouraging some level of competition between the units. So he has, his supply chain, there's a manufacturing head and this procurement, and they're basically fighting among each other. And they, the CEO doesn't really want to take the decision. So then they can't do anything, because they all have different interests, right? So the units have different interests, so they're never gonna agree among themselves, right? So I guess what I wanted also to check, in the case of Burberry, was it driven by the CEO? Was it driven by the supply chain that had the different channels and reporting into one? How was the reporting structure that enabled this to actually cascade down? Obviously you did it, right? So
it's a very good point. And let me before we talk about Burberry, let me talk about Inditex and how horizontal they are, and the fact that they don't have fancy titles, and it's a very horizontal organization where more or less it's a very lean organization where more or less everybody can say what they think, and it's very important, and people takes care about that. So it's not about, I don't think in Inditex anybody has a chief title or a SVP or VPs. They don't care about this title because in reality the only thing that they care is the consumer, and this is why this company has been so successful, because they do everything for the consumer, and everybody in the company works for that consumer independently of which area of the company you are. I think in Burberry, the combination, we were very lucky because we had Angela Arens, which is an amazing leader, and I'm so passionate about her. I think I'm still in touch with her, and I learned so much from this woman who is a merchant, and he came as a merchant, so she really understands product, and she really understands what consumer wants. So she was able to mix that with the creative guys, so in this case with the creative director of Burberry at that time. And from my side, I had Roberto and Alan Janowski. So I think Roberto Canevari was the one who was able to translate that into an organization. So I think we came with the idea. I had the 100% support from Roberto, which was very easy for me, but also from Angela. And in order to do that, we had to convince some part of the business, particularly in finance, particularly who were very worried about the management of inventory, and also in the IT community, because they didn't want to invest in the technologies that we wanted to invest. So we were crazy about having, for example, a net promoter score tool. We were crazy about having order management systems, and we were crazy about how do we connect this environment of softwares with our ERP. And I think this is critical. What I see in other organizations is that there is a competition between channels to see who can sell more. And I think that's stupid, because in reality, consumers, they research online and they purchase offline, or the other way around. Especially in Asia, I think you're in Singapore, Radu, and you know how especially Chinese consumers are very sophisticated compared with the European, American, or the rest of the world. So it's kind of pretending that the consumer is not going to check different channels is stupid. And the other thing is traffic. Traffic really matters. So if you know the traffic that somebody like Tmall, Farfetch, Jux Net-a-Porter, these guys, I'm talking about the luxury industry. These guys have traffics that not any brand will ever be able to have. How can you compete with the visits that Tmall or WeChat have every second or every day? So it's more, if you understand that you're not going to win with your brand.com e-commerce site, because these guys have more traffic, not different than the traffic that happens in a place like Galeries Lafayette in Paris or Saks in New York. So if you know that these guys are always going to have more online or offline traffic, then what you need to do is to eliminate frictions for that consumer to buy your product. Of course, you need to let the commercial people to deal with the commissions and the profitability of every single channel. But for us in supply chain, that's not our job. Our job is people want our product. How can we make it so they have it in 1 hour, 2 hours? Because believe me, if you have a consumer in New York, in Paris, or in Shanghai, I'm sure that your brand, if you're a big brand, you probably have stores there. You probably have that inventory there. So what is stopping you from delivering this customer, and especially this experience to the consumer, in 1 hour or 2 hours? And I think the challenge for us in supply chain in this digital online world is how do we replicate the offline experience and the ceremony that we're able to do in one store, like in Canton Road or in Orchard Street in Singapore, or the Fifth Avenue in New York. We're able to create a ceremony of selling in the store. How do we translate that into a ceremony of delivering a product online to a consumer that still thinks that it's luxury, or is still give us the opportunity to pass the storytelling message of that product.
Oh, I love the focus and the emphasis on the consumer. And we both know there's countless companies that usually the bigger they get, the more they forget about it, and it becomes a fight, internal fight of where's the revenue acknowledged and recognized and whatnot, and nobody really gives a hoot about the customer. So that's there's the sure way to lose focus. And we did have somebody that was very early on in the Amazon journey. So I just want to, he was actually the chief of staff, amazing guy, Colin Breyer, a few episodes back. And Colin, to your point with make sure you're measuring the right thing, right? Because it's not, don't compare apple to apple. I mean, how many people came to your store versus how many people go to Tmall? It's not even, I mean, that's not the point. That's not even the right KPI. There's not even the right objective to measure. You need both, right? And use it in the best way. Colin's point was the same, that Amazon doesn't really even measure revenue that much. They don't set targets on revenue. They say, oh, well, we do 5 billion, 10 billion, 100 billion. I mean, ultimately, the guy on the floor doesn't get this anyways, and is not within his or her control, right? So you can measure how fast you respond to customer, how you treat customer, your NPS score, that you can. But revenue, I mean, so to your point also. So some great learnings here. I'll pull a question. I think Andrei picked it up from YouTube. What are some of the innovations, and you've already spoken to, you've implemented in omnichannels that you're most proud of? How do you keep luxury brands still relevant? And maybe I'll add let's add the technology layer on this, right? So innovations in technology, you spoke about systems, you spoke about some of the things that you implement, but let's go a little bit deeper in that and maybe share some thoughts.
Yeah, I loved your question, Andrei. Thank you for that. It's what I was telling you, Radu and team. It's very important to have a very strong supply chain, but I cannot understand supply chain without IT investment. And this is why I've been very lucky, because I always had a very good relationship and partnership with my colleagues in IT. So I've been always learning. So number one, don't forget your ERP. Your ERP is very important. Is use how you build the architecture of systems around your ERP, what makes a difference. In terms of omnichannel, what the system that I mentioned before, particularly order management system, is really critical in terms of replacing the old-fashioned allocation models for a more customer-driven organization. So if we want to really be able to fulfill everything, it's not a matter anymore of having very good predictability models. I was even thinking these days, during COVID times where demand and supply has been very heavily impacted, how do you use systems to predict when a country is not going to be in lockdown and when the stores are going to be open or closed, and how is this going to impact the statistics? So I will be very careful always with these predictability systems and even in artificial intelligence in terms of allocation technology, because I think it's important to have it, but at the same time, it's even more important to be able to respond to the consumer when you are not in the right place. And I also mentioned net promoter score, which is what I do every day. Normally, when I come to my office, is kind of I want to understand what the consumers are saying. And you mentioned before the KPIs. I think there is a lot of people who doesn't have anything interesting to do, and they just create KPIs and they measure a lot of stupid things. I absolutely agree with you. And if you have more than 5 KPIs, I think you are wasting your time, because what do they say? But listening to the consumer is very important. And I learned this in Inditex. I remember very well the founder of Inditex is always talking with the consumers in the stores. And for us in Inditex, it was also very important to talk with the store manager. Listening to the store manager is critical, because they do know what's going on. They do know. I mean, normally they're not going to tell you nice things. They are always going to complain about something. But if you listen to them carefully, they will tell you that the frequency of deliveries is not good, that the time that you are delivering is not good, that of course everybody wants to have the top sellers and all of that, but it's very important not to lose track of what is happening with the consumers. And there are different technologies, as I told you. One of them is talk with if you have a store network, talk with the store managers. They will tell you a lot. And go to the stores and do kind of mystery shopping, but in supply chain. So what I do from time to time is I take one of the vans that delivers products to the stores, and I go with them and I do unload the cargo with them to see what is the experience, what is happening in the store, and what are these guys, these women or men that are receiving the product telling you. And then I tell them, by the way, I'm Andreu Marco, and I run supply chain. And they are like, oh my God, what are you doing here? And so, and it's also funny. So I think you need to understand what's going on in the stores. You need to understand what is going on with your customers and with your consumers. And this is why there are new technologies like the one we're mentioning that help you. Order management system didn't exist 10 years ago. And when we went to the market in Burberry, we had to partner with one of the big companies because they didn't have it. We even went to SAP and they didn't have it at that moment. So this is, I mean, everybody was talking about warehouse management system, how boring, allocation system, how boring. It's like, yeah, we know you need to have one of these, but is this going to solve all the problems of the consumers? Potentially not.
Hmm. And I'd like to also ask you about 3PLs, right? And your relationship with logistics providers, obviously, Christian and then the type, and how, how does that work? Because the 3PLs are a little bit in between a rock and a hard place these days, right? So they are permanently under the cost pressure, right? So
Yeah.
the client, their customers don't really want to pay, and they're always pressuring the rates. At the same time, to add more and more value, they need to become more and more sophisticated, which takes investment. And then you have, on your side specifically for Burberry Inditex, there's some very high level of not KPI, but I mean the SL, the standard. How do you call those? Right, the objectives
Service
that
level
they
agreements. Service level agreements. Yeah.
right. So how do you how do you consider when you look at this framework and the relationship and partnerships, let's call it, with 3PLs?
So Rado, for me, is critical. I don't think nowadays you can be successful without the right 3PLs. Again, in the same way that I've been very lucky in the companies that I work and the bosses and leaders that I had before, is the same case with my 3PLs. I work always with the very professional people and I learn a lot from them. I think the key word is collaboration. And long-term collaboration. I always say when you get married, you think it's for life. It doesn't necessarily has to be for life, but you definitely don't get married for 1 year or for 2 years. So when you are entering into a 3PL conversation or negotiation, you need to think that this is going to be a very long journey. You need to understand that there has to be trust. I think a typical mistakes that people does is to try to screw up the 3PL to say, I'm going to squeeze them to the maximum and then I will change. I think it's a mistake. You need to understand kind of in an open book environment, you need to understand how much my 3PL is going to make. Let's be sure that they make 5%, 7% profit. If they don't, if they are losing money, and this happens very often, just because they need the turnover, they need the revenue, it's a matter of time before everything is going to be screwed up. So I advise you to check how much is the profitability of your 3PL for your business. And keep it under control. If they are making too much money, then you have a problem. If they are losing money, then you have a problem. And for me, the key word is collaboration. There are very, and if you work in a company, you need to understand what is core and what is not core. And if you are doing in-house things that are not core, you need to think about it because it could be a distraction. So for us in Burberry, for example, what we did was to say, we're not going to run distribution centers. We're not going to run some of the fulfillment operations that we are doing or the value add services. Let's try to partner with the people who is specialists on that. Because otherwise it's going to be a distraction for our omnichannel strategy. And that gave us the opportunity to focus on technology, to focus on data, and to focus on service for the consumer. So we were defining the services, we were working with the consumers, trying to understand what is that they want. Do they want 1 hour delivery? Do they want a special service in the mega cities? And then we could translate that message into our 3PLs, partner with them, always hand to hand, and it's very critical. I had a very, you mentioned Christian from Hellman. He's a perfect example. Christian has saved my life many times during lockdown situations or when he was in his previous organization. It's also about the people. When you know that you can call somebody 24/7 and they will always answer, and what will happen is that if they are the right person, like Christian, they will mobilize all the people in that organization. And we're talking about big companies. So, of course, they can help you a lot. And in Burberry, we had many cases where we had runways, and something always happens on the last minute for our runway. I remember bringing a dress with a different size 1 hour before the catwalk or the runway from Italy to London, and having hand carry people moving product. And it happened many times because it's when you have a runway, you have millions of people who are watching this online, so everything has to be perfect. And we were lucky; everything was always perfect. But people sometimes forgets what is behind the scenes and the role of 3PLs. Which is not always Inditex people or Burberry people, is people from other companies, and I don't want to mention names, but people, 3PL companies who have been doing an amazing job for these companies.
Thanks for that. I also wanted to bring the discussion to the topic of, and we specifically had this question. I'm not sure she is able to watch, but one of our consistent listeners, she was wondering on the topic of sustainability, linked to a little bit to omnichannel, but okay, maybe specifically e-commerce growth, right? And she was actually feeling a little bit guilty. She said, okay, I ordered all these things. I made fairly small orders in each, and then I realized I have I don't know how many boxes, and then I don't know how many deliveries at my house, and then you end up, carbon footprint is one, problems in packaging is another one. How do you see, because this is a problem, how do you see this moving forward, and how can we fix it, I guess?
I think in the industry we have a massive opportunity with this. I'm not going to say problem. I will say opportunity. And I think in our companies, particularly in the fashion world, we have been able to do a lot in terms of recycling raw materials and sustainability and sustainable materials. And I think this is in crescendo. I see a lot of brands that are becoming very successful through this and selling the sustainability part. I think after the pandemic, this is going to be a massive topic because people will be very, very interested on that. The part that we need to find solutions is the fulfillment part. And I think if you now that we're all working home, how many times Amazon or different companies come to your door during one day? And they come with different bands, they come with different people. Is this sustainable? Do we? And I think the answer is no. And how long something big is going to happen before we have a wake up call. I was watching the other day one advertising of one of these companies. I don't want to say the name. One of these massive, number one e-tailer in the world, saying we're going to be carbon free in 2040. And I don't know if you have seen that. And I was like, really? Can you wait? And can you wait 20 years for that? Because I think consumers will not wait for that. So I think we need to rethink, and technology can help us. For example, technology can help us to consolidate all the deliveries that are coming to my house. Because at the end of the day, think about this. Most of the times, it can be one 3PL. It's just that at the moment they are not coordinated. So they are bringing 10 boxes to your home every day. It's probably the same company or 2 or 3 companies. So I think on the last mile, we need to find something that makes things more sustainable. Otherwise, we're going to have a massive problem with consumers and with sustainability. It's not only, and it's also people. It's kind of how much do we think that is this model of having so many people delivering boxes to your door is sustainable?
No, and that's I love your reframe. Great reframe. Yes, there's a big opportunity. Big problems come with big opportunities, or lead to big opportunities for the right entrepreneurs. And I had this conversation with somebody else. I can't remember now, but I think it was a different podcast. But recently, and they were saying something to the extent, oh yeah, I remember now. It's a venture capital fund, and they were saying, yeah, but there's a massive opportunity for an aggregator to come, okay, let's consolidate deliveries, right? So, I mean, ultimately, what's to say that you can't share the data? And then, I mean, whether you get 10 deliveries, 10 different points of the day, or you get one consolidated one at 8 p.m. in the night, I mean,
yeah.
Well,
In Japan, I study a lot Asia, and particularly China and Japan, and they do have this model where there is one company, again, I don't want to say names, but there is kind of the UPS, FedEx of Japan, which you probably know, and everybody delivers. So everything in the last mile is delivered by the same guy, and he or she have a very strong relationship with the persons, and because the addresses in Japan are so difficult, they do know exactly where Mr. or Mrs. whatever lives and what time she comes from work, and they create this very very special relationship, which is kind of an old-fashioned. But I was thinking this is potentially the way it should work. So it's kind of the consolidator of boxes or deliveries is going to come at 10 in the morning. It's always going to be the same person, and that person knows me well, and she or he knows my name and knows my family and knows my house. I think we need to think on something like that, and we're not far because the last mile is a massive problem for delivery companies. One of the biggest problems they have now is that they don't find enough people and enough vans to deliver of these parcels to the world, and also that the transportation companies don't want to work with these monsters of e-commerce because it's too big. It's more business, but they can't kill any transportation business. So I think I can see some things happening already, and it has to be linked with the sustainability, but also with the fact that you don't want to be doing concierge work in your house, right? I'm not sure how much longer we're all going to be able to work from home, because I think we will come back to the offices soon. So what will happen? Who will receive these boxes, and how this is going to happen? Let's don't forget that I think the drivers is one of these careers or one of these jobs that we know is going to disappear. It's a matter of time before we have vans and drivers coming. The vans may come, but without anybody driving them. And I don't think we're too far from there. But it's still, the problem is still there of sustainability. Can we afford to have many deliveries into one home, but also into companies? Because nobody wants to receive many parcels during the day. You want to, and think about the stores. In Inditex, we were one of the first companies who decided to deliver to the stores at night, and we gave the keys of the stores when I was in Inditex to the drivers. And the stores were being fulfilled, were being replenished at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And we did it because of mainly because of sustainability, but also to avoid congestions in the high streets, and to avoid problems to deliveries. And because Inditex believes in speed, so they wanted to have all the product before the stores opens. So I think we need to find more of these creative solutions in terms of deliveries, because the model that we are creating is a monster, and it's absolutely unsustainable to pretend that we're going to buy everything online and that we're going to have every half an hour we're going to have a driver knocking our door, which is happening now. So we need to think.
Yeah. No, yeah. To your point, I think it's going to happen, but hopefully sooner rather than later. I do vividly remember the model in Japan. I was fascinated. Actually, it's almost like there's a postman of the neighborhood, and I remember they have their. I mean, right? They have their kind of garage, right, where they, where they
Yeah,
pack all the books,
and the
and then
logo,
they
the logo of the cat. So it's very,
yeah, of
I
course.
think
I
it's
mean,
lovely because it's the same person and it's a very friendly relationship, and it's the same person for years and years. So I think we need to think on something like that.
yeah, and with the use of technology, I mean, again, I think the technology is there. It's just that there's some legacy mindset problems in terms of companies sharing information and in terms of collaboration. That's maybe
Yeah.
the more so.
And don't forget reverse logistics, because returns is 20
Yeah,
to 40% of what we buy. So it's kind of, what do we do with returns?
yeah.
Because this is a very unsustainable model. So again, for me, I'm very passionate about it because I think it's a massive opportunity in terms of us in supply chain. Now that I think more or less we have been able to give the power to the consumer in terms of allocation and deciding what product they want and how they want it. And most of the systems that we're creating are going in that direction, which is get out of taking decisions, allow the consumer to take decisions. Now, the next chapter for me is how are we going to solve the sustainability chapter for the consumer, because they will not buy it. And it doesn't matter how much sustainable we want to be in our companies, which I think we all want to be sustainable. But there will be, I can tell you, there are countries in the world. I think Singapore is one of them, but you have places like Germany or the Nordic countries where they don't want packaging. They don't want, they are very, very environmental. Um, so they really want to have sustainable solutions. And if we don't find them, they will create a problem for our companies.
Yeah. Well, and on a very pragmatic level, we are all in this, right? If we don't find a solution, we kind of
We need to lead.
screwing
We need to
ourselves.
lead. We need to lead in a proactive way. Otherwise, we're going to be in the reactive way, and it's going to be complicated. We're going to be managing social media problems. We're going to be managing reputation problems, which we want to avoid. So I think we're in a good situation in the industry. We still can manage it, but let's don't forget about it.
Mm. As we approach the end, I want to also kind of ask you one or two questions on the. So let's start with education, right? So you're also a part-time professor, yeah, an associate professor, and you're teaching supply chain management. What's your views on supply chain education at large? And I mean, I've had many conversations here in Singapore. Actually, that there's a very strong relationship, education sector, government here, and corporates, and they're always trying to figure out, how do we keep pace with the technology development and teach our students. But what's your views specifically for supply chain, and what should we or should you be teaching students, right, so they come prepared to the workforce?
I see, Radu, a big gap between what the students are learning in universities or even in the masters of supply chain with the real life. And I don't think we're doing enough. I think the conversations now should be about marketplaces, about e-learning, about sustainability, about attributes for the product. And I still think that we're teaching old-fashioned things. So I think we need to recycle ourselves and help these new generations to be prepared. I mean, if for my students, I try to spend as much time as I can in terms of digitalization, in terms of new technologies, data management. So if you don't put these things together with supply chain, if you don't put technology, IT, data, artificial intelligence next to supply chain, you are going to have professionals that will not have any jobs in the future. So this is not about freight forwarding anymore. This is not about creating allocation systems. This is about working with consumers who behave in a very different way, that are data driven. So we need data specialists in supply chain, and we need people who understands consumer needs, which are changing. And I always say, if we watch what is happening in China, and we try to explain this in Europe and US, that will be a lot. Because we are like 10 years away from all the technology that has been implemented in Asia nowadays. So if the only thing we do is to say, guys, learn what is happening in China, even if it is not innovation because it's happening now, that will help them. Because I think we're very old-fashioned in Europe and in the US. I think retail, and is kind of people is starting to wake up in terms of what is happening with high street. And of course, COVID has augmented this transformation. But it's our obligation to tell our new generations that the change is happening faster than what we thought and what we expected. And there are models that we need that can inspire us. I think Inditex, or even what we did in Burberry is very inspiring, but also what is happening in other companies. And I always use, for me, I use a company called Zappos in the US, which is very inspiring, and I learn a lot from them. But also what is happening with the marketplaces and the e-commerce monsters in China in particular.
And you have, a brand that I love is Allbirds. They've done an amazing, there's some incredible stories out there. But to your point, obviously I'm biased because I sit in Singapore. I'm European by birth, but I think there's a big discussion. There's people in Europe and in even US and Canada, they don't realize how advanced. And I'm maybe not even talk about the whole of Asia because maybe it's not fair. But China is it's incredible. Wow, there's things that you like. What it's fascinating what they've managed to build, and they're so fast to implement. So yeah, lots to learn. Final question from me. what would be, looking back on your career, if you had to give some pieces of advice to our younger audience, and maybe not so young as well, I think we can all learn, right? What would be some of the most relevant two um, advices that you would share for a successful career?
I will say what I learned in the text, which is partner and collaborate with your vendors. This is not, if your vendors are not successful, your company and your product is not going to be successful. So it's all about integration, collaboration, synchronization with your vendors, and give them as much information as you can of what is happening with your products. So help them with the forecasting, help them with the help your vendors as much as you can, because they probably need more help and support than anybody else. Number two, the consumer. Put the consumer to drive all your supply chain. You are not the boss, you are a servant leadership. And if you allow the consumer to drive most of the decisions, and your role becomes the elimination of frictions between the product and the consumer, you are going to be very successful. So vendor in one side, consumer in the other side, and you in the middle, just eliminating barriers and frictions. And that will be my best advice.
Love it. Well, on that note, Andreu, I want to thank you for your time. I want to encourage our viewers, listeners, and we got many questions. I'll also take you to some offline. Do follow Andreu. You can find him on LinkedIn. And some great stories, great sharing, and thanks a lot for making the time to join us today.
Thank you, Radu. Great conversation. And I follow you a lot, so thank you for organizing this.